Welcome to Destination Michigan. We celebrate the people and places that make Michigan a great place to live. Sit back and enjoy tonight's edition of Destination Michigan.
Support for Destination Michigan is provided by the CMU Bookstore. T-shirts, sweatshirts, hats, maroon and gold memories, and an official outfitter of Adidas apparel at the Central Michigan University-owned and operated CMU Bookstore. Online shopping 7 days a week at cmubookstore.com. The CMU Bookstore, online at cmubookstore.com, on campus in the University Center, and game day locations at Kelly Short Stadium and the CMU Events Center. And by Country Smokehouse in Elmont, offering a selection of gourmet meats including homemade sausage and jerky. Also available, custom catering and weekend outdoor barbecues. Information at countrysmokehouse.com. Tonight on Destination Michigan.
Well, it actually began several 100 million years ago when this was a saltwater sea, a shallow saltwater sea.
We dig up the rich history and celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Calcite Quarry in Rogers City.
When people walk into the Marcia Fredericks Sculpture Museum, they are stunned by all of the beautiful white sculptures.
We'll introduce you to sculptor Marshall M. Fredericks and visit the Saginaw Museum that houses some of his innovative work.
It's amazing how much art, fine art, you can find that surrounds us.
The beauty of Michigan through the eyes and photography of Ludington's Todd and Brad Reed.
Tonight on Destination Michigan, we're going to be in one of my favorite little towns, snugged right up to the shores of Lake Superior.
Hello and welcome to Destination Michigan. Tonight we'll kick it off with a story about a big hole in the ground that at one point was billed locally as the 8th wonder of the world. The hole in the ground is the world's largest limestone open pit quarry, and it's the pride and joy of Rogers City. This year marks the 100th anniversary of the Calcite Quarry in Rogers City, and its rich history tells the tale of a hard-working small community and the pride that this big hole in the ground has provided for up to 4 generations of families. To Rogers City we go, to the Calcite Quarry, to kick off tonight's edition of Destination Michigan.
Rogers City actually began around 1870 as a typical northern Michigan lumber town. Presque Isle County might have had more cedar than any county in the state of Michigan. The lumbering industry in northern Michigan started to die around 1900, and basically by 1920 it was dead. About the time that the industry was dying, along came Michigan Limestone with the quarry. The first mining was done by the Crawford family that lived down where Calcite is today. And they were from New York, and they probably shipped out 1 or 2 very small boatloads of limestone that was all dug by hand, you know, picks and shovels and that sort of thing. In 1910, William F. White of New York City, an investment banker, bought up 5,000 acres of land here and started Michigan Limestone and Chemical Company. And the plant began producing stone and shipping it in the late spring of 1912, and so this is its 100th anniversary this year. But White owned the company virtually, he had enough stock to make all the decisions, and he sold it to United States Steel. It was their largest customer right from the first day of the company. It's still their largest customer today. And that continued until the 1980s. They had some financial problems as a result of their purchase of Marathon. So they started selling off some of their assets, and they sold off part of the limestone quarry and part of the fleet that operated out of here. We actually went to around 5,000 people here when the quarry was at its peak production in the 1950s and 60s. The largest production year was 1953. They shipped 16,600,000 tons of stone from here. Well, it actually began several hundred million years ago when this was a saltwater sea, a shallow saltwater sea. The last glacier that receded tore all of the soil and whatever off the side of that limestone deposit. So when you went by in a boat, you saw this forested hillside, and then you saw a great big area of white limestone. And so from the very earliest settlers, people were talking about doing something commercial with that deposit of limestone. The first step in the process, they refer to it as the extraction process. And so limestone is being extracted from a massive field of limestone that underlies this whole area. And that's done by blasting the rock. They drill holes, fill them with explosives, set off the explosion, which breaks this big solid piece of limestone up into chunks. Those chunks are mined today by massive front-end loaders, the largest front-end loaders that Caterpillar builds, the big 994s, with a 25 cubic yard bucket on them. And then the stone is shipped in trucks from 175 to 200 ton capacity trucks to the crusher. And the stone, which then is in sizes from 5 feet diameter down to very small stuff, it all goes through the crusher. It goes from the lower level of the crusher by conveyor belt up to the top of the screen house or mill. It's actually a 14-story building, but it goes to the 12th floor in the mill. And then it falls down from there. Gravity takes it down through a series of screens that's separated out by size, and at the same time it's washed. It kind of rolls off to the side, goes onto a conveyor belt, and is carried by conveyor belt out to a storage pile. Under the storage piles are big reinforced concrete tunnels, and in each of those tunnels is a conveyor belt system, and it gets carried to the ship loader. And the ship loader loads it into a boat, and the boat takes it up or down the lakes wherever it's going to. Originally, the mining was done by steam shovels, and they loaded trains pulled by steam locomotives. In the 1930s, the steam locomotives were replaced by big diesel locomotives, but they ran in a big circular pattern. The train went out in the quarry, stopped at a shovel, the shovel loaded it, they went around, and they actually went through the crusher building. It's one of the most commonly found minerals on the planet, and it's one of the most widely used minerals. Now, the limestone from here, initially, all of the limestone from calcite went to steelmaking. And then Bradley developed the market for its use in making cement, and then taking the cement and adding larger stone to it to make concrete. It's fed to chickens in their feed to make their eggshells harder. When you have an aspirin, in all likelihood, the binder in that aspirin and the inactive ingredient is limestone. One of the really growing demands for limestone today is in the desulfurization of the gases coming out of coal-fired power plants. The process is exactly the same. The equipment that's being used, for the most part, is much larger today and much more sophisticated. But it's still conveyor belts that move it around. I think they mentioned they have 9 miles of conveyor belt in the plant down there. Huge operation, all driven by big electric motors. So from the time a truck dumps it into the crusher until the time it's loaded into a lake freighter and they put in 20 or 25,000 tons at a time, nobody touches the rock. It's all done by automation, and it's quite a marvelous process. We're at the Presque Isle County Historical Museum, which was opened in 1981 in what was Carl Bradley's house. And the next 3 presidents of the limestone quarry and their families lived here. We have exhibits here documenting the history of Presque Isle County from the very early lumber era through today. And we have, at the present time, about 90 active volunteers upon whom we're completely dependent for the operation of this place. Most of the things that are on display here were donated or loaned to the museum by people from the area. So it is an absolutely phenomenal area.
The quarry is officially known as the Carmeuse Lime and Stone Calcite Operation, and they expect to ship 5 million tons of limestone this year. For more information on the history of the Calcite Quarry and the community of Rogers City, you can visit the website of the Presque County Historical Museum at pihistory.org. Next up, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. But when Sarah Adams visits a local museum, we learn that sculptures often have a whole story to tell about the artist who created them. Let's take a visit to Saginaw and the Marshall M. Fredericks Sculpture Museum on the campus of Saginaw Valley State University for our next stop on tonight's edition of Destination Michigan.
People visiting the Marshall M. Fredericks Sculpture Museum in Saginaw often have a similar reaction.
They are stunned by all of the plaster, all of the beautiful white sculptures. The second thing people almost always comment on is the size, the monumental size of the sculptures.
These are the plaster molds of mammoth bronze sculptures that can be found all over the world. And as you look around, you can't help but wonder about the man behind these sculptures. These exhibits are impressive, but who was Marshall Fredericks?
He was born in Rock Island, Illinois, which was a community of Scandinavian settlers. And at age 4, he said his mother gave him a bar of soap and told him to make something. And he did. And that's where his sculpting career actually began.
As a young adult, Marshall Fredericks received a scholarship that took him to Europe to study with a famous Swedish sculptor. Fredericks later ended up at Michigan's Cranbrook Academy of Art. Then, World War II broke out.
After Pearl Harbor was bombed during the war, he decided in the following January that he had to do his part and join the service.
And on the military base where he was stationed, Fredericks found his future wife, Rosalind.
Marshall had actually met Roz Cook before he went into service. And somehow he knew that on the base where he was stationed in this country, that she was there. He looked her up and she was driving a Jeep. And so whether he asked for her to be his driver or she was assigned to him, I don't know. But they struck up what everyone strikes up, and they later married. They were married while he was in service.
After the war, Marshall Fredericks opened a studio in Royal Oak. And as his fame and popularity grew, the demand for his work grew too, both across the country and around the world. Perhaps the most famous sculpture known to Michigan residents is the iconic Spirit of Detroit.
That sculpture and the backdrop for that sculpture were all part of a partnership. Harley Ellington Day architectural firm designed that building, and that firm asked Marshall Fredericks if he would collaborate with them to create a monumental sculpture to be at the entrance. And that was that partnership. So Marshall Fredericks really became known as a sort of an architect's artist. He did a lot of collaborations with architects.
Fredericks was also connected to other Michigan icons, including famous Midland architect Alden B. Dow.
Alden B. Dow was asked to design the McMorran Auditorium in Port Huron, and he asked Marshall Fredericks to create a beautiful sculptural fountain to sit in front of that auditorium. So the night and day fountain sits in front of that auditorium. Freedom of the Human Spirit was originally commissioned for the 1964 New York World's Fair, and it still resides there in Flushing Meadows, New York. Some people who knew Marshall Fredericks in the 60s and 70s thought that downtown Birmingham should have its own Marshall Fredericks monumental sculpture. They raised enough money to have Freedom of the Human Spirit cast and placed in Cheyne Park in downtown Birmingham.
Soon, the artistry of Marshall Fredericks could be found in more than 150 places all over the world, from the Frederick Meyer Gardens in Grand Rapids to Denmark, England, Finland, Japan, Norway, and Sweden. Then, in April of 1998, Marshall M. Fredericks passed away.
He was working at his studio until 3 or 4 days before he died. So he truly was an artist who gave his whole life for the passion of sculpting. If I had to call Marshall Fredericks one thing, it would be gentle. He was a monumental thinker with a very gentle spirit. He loved people. He especially loved children. And he loved animals. And you see that in the faces of the most ferocious animals. I mean, the lion is one of the most ferocious animals that lives. And the lion that Marshall Fredericks created, the lion and mouse, for the Eastland Shopping Center, has a very sweet, gentle face. The museum itself is just a very beautiful, quiet, contemplative place. A place for learning, for relaxing. I think great artists should be studied, should be remembered, should be respected.
You can learn more about the Marshall M. Fredericks Sculpture Museum by visiting their website, marshallfredericks.org. Next up, from publishing books to owning a gallery to participating in Art Prize to having their Michigan-themed photographs all over roadside billboards, father-son duo Todd and Brad Reed take their photography business to a whole new level. To Ludington we go to learn more about photographers Todd and Brad Reed.
I am a small town boy, and I never want to be anything but a small town boy. And I was fortunate enough that my parents raised me in one of the most beautiful towns anywhere in the world, Ludington, Michigan, and the point-to-point region, we call it, from Big Point Sable to Little Point Sable. It doesn't get any better. I'm Todd Reed of Todd and Brad Reed Photography, and my son Brad and I are equal partners in our Ludington gallery and in our photography business.
In 2001, my dad had been activated in the Coast Guard full-time because of 9/11, and he'd been in the reserves for 30 plus years at that point. And the little photo business here was kind of dying, and in 2004, I told my dad, I said, you know, Dad, I'll work for you for a year and I'll run your business. A year and a half later, we had our first book out. So it's been kind of a wild ride ever since.
I had always wanted to publish a book. When I was in college early on, I thought I was going to write a novel. You know, it's going to be like the next F. Scott Fitzgerald or something, or Hemingway. Seeing as I was a Michigan boy, Hemingway would probably have been more appropriate, and I was a nature, outdoor kind of guy. As life would take it, my first book ended up being a photography book, and when I went to that Chief Petty Officers Academy in the Coast Guard, I came out of there determined to just tear into goals. And that goal of a book was hanging over my head, and I immediately set out with my wife and support from my kids. I have 3 boys, and they all were all in on carrying bags and helping, and just moral support as well. And we did that book, which was Ludington Point to Point, as a book of our 40-mile shoreline region here from Big Point Sable to Little Point Sable.
Our first book that we did jointly was Lake Michigan Point to Point, and it came out in May of 2005. And we call it Point to Point because it's between Big Sable Point Lighthouse and Little Sable Point Lighthouse. And there's the 40-mile lakeshore between. And that book is all the water between those 2 points. So Lake Michigan, obviously, but then Hamlin Lake, Pentwater Lake, and all the rivers, the Pere Marquette, the Sable, the Pentwater River, and the Lincoln River. And the book had about 140 images of that area, and it was an overwhelming success. And it was a follow-up to my dad's first book that he had done in 2000. We did our 3rd book on Ludington State Park. We shot for an entire year, and we both thought we knew the park pretty well. We'd grown up here our whole lives, and our families are very adventurous. That book came out in May of 2008, and again had overwhelming success with it. Sold a lot of copies very quickly and a lot of prints out of it. And what was exciting about the state park book was we had never shot a lot of wildlife before that time. We were mainly lighthouses, landscapes, vegetation, but not a lot of wildlife. And of course, for the state park, a big, the beautiful part of the park are the creatures that live there. So we bought giant telephoto lenses and had to really learn how to become wildlife photographers. One day, I don't know what made me think of it, but I thought we should do a Facebook project, call it 365, where we shoot a picture every day that would force my dad and I to get outside and shoot and do what we're best at.
I love going down country roads. I love walking on trails at the state park and on the beaches, and I could just get lost doing that. And here it was my job, it was my duty to go shoot these pictures. Like, too bad, you know, rough gig. Once that got done and we got to Tuesdays was, like, to me, doubly exciting, because instead of just trying to get a picture every day of the year, and some of those days are really busy with work and family commitments and other things, we could literally have that be, I'll just call it it's our golf day.
The Tuesday is definitely the most fun because it becomes an entire day of nonstop adventure. We, a lot of times, have an idea where we're gonna go, but we don't have set plans on what we're gonna shoot. It's amazing how much art, fine art, you can find that surrounds us.
Anybody can shoot a picture, especially today with digital cameras, but what it's really about is making an image that when somebody looks at it, they literally can step into the picture. They literally mentally transcend that it's a picture, and they're literally experiencing what we were experiencing, and that's really the secret to really good photography, I think.
To take a look at the Reed's photography projects, visit toddandbradreed.com. Our final destination takes us north, way north. Our Bob Garner is a little bit country and a whole lot of rocks and roll, as he takes us to the countryside around Munising to check out his favorite pictured rocks along the rolling shoreline of Lake Superior. Jump on board with Bob and Pictured Rocks cruise owner John Madigan as we head to Munising to wrap up tonight's edition of Destination Michigan.
Munising is by any measure a small town, but it is one cool place to be. It's got the little town charm of small businesses like a hometown hardware store to very good restaurants that serve about the freshest whitefish you could ever sink your teeth into. But it's the 15 or so miles of shoreline, Superior shoreline, that makes Munising the place to come to see the Pictured Rocks Lakeshore. A cruise along that shoreline is as good as it gets. Pictured Rocks cruise manager John Madigan says hundreds of thousands of people make their way to Munising to experience this natural wonder. John, it's like hundreds of thousands of people come to the National Lakeshore just for that shore experience.
Yes, Pictured Rocks gets in excess of 400,000 to 500,000 visitors a year. We take out a small percentage of that, but it's 40 miles of just pure spectacular shoreline. Beaches, sandstone cliffs, colors, formations, just a multitude of just very interesting items on the shoreline.
Pretty spectacular. What's your favorite spot out here?
My favorite spot, you got really two different dynamics of Pictured Rocks. You have formations that resemble different things like Indian Head or Battleship Row or Lover's Leap or Miner's Castle. And then you have the perspective of the mineral seepage in the water coming through and putting through some spectacular colors. And I think the colors in my mind are my favorite spots, and there's a couple spots along the lakeshore that just have just a spectrum of colors that are just so vivid.
You know what gets me is how close some of your captains get to this. But that really depends on the wave action and the wind action of the day, doesn't it?
Yeah, and one nice thing about the pictured rocks is, since it's sandstone, a lot of it's right straight down in the water, 20-25 feet, which allows us to get the boats fairly close in some areas and gives the spectacular opportunity for people to take photographs or to get up close and personal to this spectacular shoreline. We get people from all over the country, all over the Midwest, and all over the world, and they compare this to out west and Yellowstone and to the Grand Canyon, and it is really one of Michigan's treasures that's starting to become known now. Up to 10 or 15 years ago, it was a lot of work to get here and old roads to get here. Now with the technology and the new paved road between Grand Marais and Munising, and with the Kid Rock being on the video, and with the Park Service.
Bob Seeger gave you a big howdy do and endorsement, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's just been a lot of publicity. And I think there's a general trend in our culture to get back to nature. I've noticed that, the pictured rocks and the National Lake Shores are seeing growth and at least stability in their numbers. And some of these touristy type attractions, I've noticed, they're trying to maintain their numbers. And I think there's a natural trend in our culture to go back and get back to nature.
So we're growing here then?
We're growing, there's more people coming, and people are amazed by this shoreline.
For more information on the Pictured Rocks cruise and other great cruises around the shorelines of our great state, check out their website at picturedrocks.com. And that is a wrap for tonight's show. Be sure to join us next time for another edition of Destination Michigan.